Good afternoon. This is Nancy Stainback, and I am studying my doctoral in education and elementary education curriculum instruction. And tonight I'll be talking to you about Burris Frederick Skinner. Good evening, everyone. And Burris Frederick Skinner was born on March 20th, 1904, and is known as the father of operant conditioning. B.F. Skinner died, unfortunately, August 18th of 1990 at age 86 and was buried at Cambridge, Massachusetts. B.F. Skinner was known for the study of behavior and actions. B.F. Skinner wanted results of behavioral experiments that could be modified, an unconditional stimulus and an unconditional response. Skinner applied his ideas from laboratory studies of animals, which identified operant conditioning in papers. Early in Skinner's career, he became interested in education and developed teaching machines and programs instructions. B.F. Skinner's career made a profound impact on psychology and learning. Learning aligned with contemporary developments in science, psychology, and must not focus on the disposition, but focus on the environmental sides of the organism's environment, such as the behavioral traits and Skinner's radical behaviorism. Skinner had a focus on the environmental interaction, and changes in human welfare. And Skinner work in operant conditioning made an impact on learning theories in topics of psychology, and such as personal changes, implementing theories of intellectuals and intelligence, and also skill learning with language. B.F. Skinner operant conditioning theory had been used with substance abusers and children of hearing impact and handicapped children. And Christian teachers use this technique to encourage memorization and reciting of class work. Behavioral learning theories focus on the ways that pleasure or unpleasant consequences of behavior change an individual's behavior over time, and the ways the individual models their behavior on that of the others. After a teaching techniques is applied to help the student to make the link between a new skill and the natural reinforcements in the environment, such as maintaining that skill. Um, Skinner's concept of selection of consequences in the four additional topics of psychology, personal change, implementing the theory of intelligence and skill learning and language, and the highlights of advantages of selectivism and control to essentialism. Theories are perspectives that help us make a sense of um, the environment um, and the events. Theories served as bridges between the research and the educational practices, as well as tools to organize and translate research findings into recommendations for educational practices. Skinner's behaviorism theory shares important similarities with positive psychology and current psychological research and critical um, psychiatry, suggesting that Skinner behaviorism may be reintegrated into mainstream psychology with educational and research practices, such as continuing improving on the behaviorism learning theory. B.F. Skinner had four four experiments that had influences in developmental understanding of operant conditioning. Four of B.F. Skinner's experiences have set the stage for strategies used today in teaching. Experiment one we can discuss is called the operant conditioning chamber, and it is known as the Skinner box. And this is where he used the test subjects such as rats and pigeons, and he loved pigeons. In the Skinner box, the subject must learn the desired behavior through trial and error. Okay, the experiment number two, along once again, was pigeons that he taught to read based on his work in operant conditioning chamber, with teaching pigeons to read words presented to the pigeon to receive food. Skinner taught the pigeons a simple task, picking a colored disc in order to receive a reward. Skinner added additional environmental cues, which were words paired with a specific behavior required to meet and receive the reward. Skinner taught the pigeons to read and respond to several unique commands, and the pigeons really couldn't actually read the words, but as Skinner wanted us to believe. But the fact that he taught the birds multiple behaviors was linked to the specific stimulus by using operant conditioning shows that this form of behavioral learning can be a powerful tool for, um, teaching and both animals and human in the complex behaviors that is based on environmental cues. Experiment three was the pigeon and the ping pong. Um, B.F. Skinner taught pigeons how to play table tennis. The pigeons were placed on either side of the box and were taught to peck the ball to the other pigeon. As the pigeons were able to peck the ball across the table to one another, the small amount of food was reward, and the reinforcement of the behavior of the pecking of the ball past their opponent was when the food was rewarded. The ping pong experiment shows the operant conditioning can be used to teach dynamic goal-based behaviors in students. Experiment 4, pigeons guided missiles. What an incredible piece of work B.F. Skinner did here. He trained the pigeons to control the flight paths of the missiles for the U.S. Army during the Second World War. This experiment was never used in the field due to the advances of other scientific areas, but this was created using operant training for animals' behaviors like service dogs for the blind. And B.F. Skinner identified the three types of responses in the neutral operant, as which is responses from the environmental that does neither increase nor decrease the probability of having a behavioral being repeated. Reinforcements, which these response from the environment that increase the probability of the behavior being repeated. The reinforcement can be positive or negative. Pushers are responses from the environment that decreases the behavior from being repeated. And the punishment had weakened the behavior. The operant conditioning can be applied in classrooms, prisons, and even psychiatric hospitals. B.F. Skinner aligned his psychological research with both natural and Darwin theories of natural selection. B.F. Skinner allowed classical conditioning research, such as he didn't allow it, he followed the classical conditionings of a research Pavlov, who proclaimed that two stimulus are linked together to produce a new learned response in the person or animal. Pavlov's classical conditioning was accidentally discovered through the research with dogs and salivation. Skinner became interested in psychology after reading Pavlov's 1927 conditional reflex and Watson's 1924 behaviorism. After another influential person in Skinner's life was John Watson, who claimed classical conditioning explained all aspects of human technology, basing this on Pavlov's observation. B.F. Skinner believed people do not have a mind, but it's more productive to observe behavior rather than mentally eventing like mental events like Pavlov and Watson had done. Edward Thorndike, who created the law of effect principle in 1898 in psychology, learning theory, which led to development of operant conditioning with behaviorism. And Skinner researched his roots in classical conditioning, but the best way Skinner understood behaviorism was to look at the cause of the action with the consequences that was produced. Skinner's theory is called operant conditioning, and Skinner believed that learners come to know the truth through behavioral theories, which stresses the role of the environment, such as how the stimuli are arranged and prevented how the responses are responded and reinforced. Skinner in 1930 founded the school of philosophy named Radical Behaviorism, and the school's foundation was based on looking outward, not inward, to solve the problems. Skinner believed that conditioning controlled the outcome of the people's behavior through the calculated reinforcement. People could help to live happier and safer and healthier lives. B.F. Skinner wrote a science fiction novel called Walden 2 in 1948. B.F. Skinner wanted this book to be a template for how to create a small utopia community governed by behaviorists implementing the method of positive reinforcement. B.F. Skinner's critics called the novel fascism with tears. The community idea was compared to a big dog obedience class with references to Skinner. Animal training. The technology of teaching Skinner in 1968 addressed instructions, motivation, discipline, and creativity. And B.F. Skinner taught the three institutions, which was the University of Minnesota, Indiana, and Howard University. B.F. Skinner finished his studies at the Hamilton College and Harvard University. The perspective on diversity in B.F. Skinner and the operant condition theory has become an incredible tool in today's society as we train animals for the task of search and rescue, the training of the blind for the disabled companion service animals, and operant conditioning in use in schools to motivate and discipline students. The school of behavior theory must have two learner variables. One is the reinforcement history, which means that the extent of the reinforcement to the individual in the past performing a similar behavior. And the second is the development status of what they are capable of doing. So for the example, and the student is a cognitive handicap, the learning will be hindered by the complex skills. But if the handicap is physically disabled, the motor skills behavior can be affected by the outcome. How the student attends to, rehearses, transforms, stores, and retrieves knowledge is critical, important in learning. The way knowledge is processed determines when and how the learning will occur. The critics of behaviorism focus on the theoretical weaknesses. Psychology considers the classical form of behaviorism to be wrong in the sense that modern cognitive research has clearly demonstrated the role of mental processing in psychology. Though behaviorism has been misconstructed, to demonstrate some evidence of the gay conversion therapy, there's no published, uh, research using this behavior as an analytical principle that can support the claim. In the classroom, when a teacher uses rewards to alter the classroom's behavior, the student can possibly become dependent on eccentric um, rather than entric rewards. And the problem a teacher has to face in the classroom is not how to get the student to learn, but how to help the student learn particular information, skills, and concepts that will be used in their lives. Teachers want to present students the right stimuli on which to focus their attention and mental efforts so they will accept and acquire important skills. Skinner is limited in the sense of that in his theory, and which is useful in creating effective learning situations in those tasks that are close to the animal level of mechanism activity. Both Skinner and the scriptures recognize the fact that the environment has a role to play in human behavior. Skinner believes that the environment determines the human behavior. The scriptures, on the other hand, hold the environment can influence the human behavior without necessarily determining it. Skinner's behaviorism theory shares important similarities with positive psychology. Current psychological research and critical psychiatric suggests that Skinner's behaviorism may be reintegrated with the mainstream psychology with education and the research practices to continue improving on behaviorism learning theories. The factor that must occur in operant conditioning is the situation would depend on what has been reinforced for doing in the past circumstances, and educators have to work towards helping each student to grow in a developmental learning by whatever actions are needed to learn. Rather, be clear and measurable. Objectives have small steps and deliver reinforcements. I agree with B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning because I face these circumstances daily with my exceptional children in my class of first grade. I change the environmental circumstances for the ADH children who can and cannot handle the daily changes. The routine of the same stimuli happening daily helps the student not to break down in resistance of instruction. In conclusion, operant conditioning working with animals and B.F. Skinner experiments is helping handicapped children and adults in today's society.